Hi there, Jonathan here. The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website where you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. That's at www.jonathanfoust.com. Thank you and enjoy. It's nice to be back. I had an interesting few weeks. The first leg of my trip was going out to Denver and on to Boulder, where I was the dinner speaker for a group of the YPO, the Young Presidents Organization, and that was really fun to talk about meditation and mindfulness and how it relates to being an executive and being effective in the world. That was a blast. And I got to spend some time with one of my best friends in the world. And as I flew back from Denver to D.C., I picked up some bug. I should have said namaste to the guy next to me instead of shaking his hand and asking him how it was hanging. But by the time I arrived, I could just feel this cold or whatever it was settling in. And that was right in time for the next leg of my adventure, which was to lead a weekend retreat at the Garrison Institute with Tara, my wife. And she actually led it because I was so sick. I really couldn't leave the room. But she did a great job. And then we went on to the next leg, which was a 7-day personal retreat at the Forest Refuge at the Insight Meditation Society in central Massachusetts. And by the time we arrived, she got it, but even worse than I had it. And previous to all of this, and kind of exacerbated, was something in my left ear was blocked. It wasn't draining. And so I switched to using a kind of a medicated nasal spray, which had some extra juice, which completely messed up my sleep. And I had the attention span of a caffeinated ferret. So this earache was just like having a butter knife in my ear the whole time. And then that led into a migraine. And, if you listen to me long enough, you'll know I say oftentimes if you stay with unpleasant sensation long enough, it may lead to some great insight or some great breakthrough. But not this time. It just stunk. A good friend of mine just sent me a poem hot off the press. This is Dana Falls, who's just a wonderful, wonderful poet. And this kind of described my experience pretty well. And it might describe your experience in meditation as well. It looks like I'm meditating. Legs crossed, eyes closed, hands resting on my thighs. But inside, thoughts are spinning. How many times can I bring my focus back to the breath? I may be setting a new world record, touching breath for a split second before careening back to current events, past trauma, the pain in my head from yesterday's migraine. I breathe in steadiness, but my best intentions dissolve in worry, anxiety, or any of 100 other feelings. So I make space for the experience of distraction. This too is life. I breathe in acceptance, and then my thoughts are off again, caught by last night's dreams. Is there no peace here? What's true is the wild nature of mind and the vast stillness underlying all that frantic activity. I get the merest glimpse of spaciousness, but it's enough to remind me that I'm not just my thoughts or moods. There's something more true, more universal, and more freeing than the hamster wheel I race in. Can you relate to that? This mind, as Ramana Maharshi described it, is a drunken monkey stung by scorpions. And we get to watch it when we slow down. And every now and then there's a little bit of spaciousness that you are not your thoughts, that there's something that's actually beyond that. And that is the liberation factor. So I did actually learn a few things on my retreat. I wanted to share some of them with you. 4 little chapters of this talk, the time I have left. The first chapter is, I know nothing for certain. The second is, most of who I am is conditioning. The third is, enlightenment is not a magic wand. And the fourth is to know the not-self, get to know the self. So I arrived at the retreat kind of feeling sick, and my sleep was messed up. I could only sleep a few hours at night, and then tried to stay awake the next day so I'd sleep the next day, and I just couldn't focus on anything. So I decided to switch my tactics from developing concentration or shamatha. It's usually suggested when you're on a retreat that you spend the first couple of days really developing concentration. So really train yourself to arrive, kind of as we did in the beginning of this meditation. Use the breath, use the tool. It's a training of the mind to be present. It's not the end result, but it's tremendously helpful. But I just couldn't do it. So I thought, let me just maybe move into inquiry. Inquiry is really selecting a question that you keep coming back to. Like you come back to the breath, you come back to a question. And a very powerful question that I've been exploring is, what do I know for certain? And so as I would use the breath as an anchor, I would use that as my anchor when I couldn't sit for too long because I felt so terrible, but just lying there, well, what do I know for certain? So a thought would come up, this is going to be a long and terrible retreat. Well, do I know that for certain? This earache, it's nothing, it's going to pass. Do I know that for certain? I'm definitely going to lose my hearing in my left ear. All of that. And so I kept coming back to that question. What do I know for certain? And inevitably it kind of left me to the question, well, I'm going to die. I know that for certain. But then when I stayed with that, it really kind of led to a question, well, what is it that dies? The body is going to pass away, but what about consciousness? That inquiry is so powerful. It's very deconstructive because it challenges all of your fundamental beliefs. And it kind of leaves you with, I don't know, which is a very kind of tender, mysterious place to cultivate. So I thought we might do a little 1-minute inquiry, if you like, when you close your eyes. And you reflect on this life that you're living, of your dreams, your goals, your relationships, this body that you're inhabiting. What do you know for certain? you might explore as well, what is the effect of that question on your mind, on your internal experience? And you might now deepen your breath. You can let your eyes open, or you can remain with them closed if you prefer. We live in a constructed reality. Most of the time, we are running a narrative that kind of keeps our world together. It's not a bad thing. It actually helps us to drive cars at the same time and do business with each other. There are certain constructions that we live in that are very skillful about being effective in the world. When you look at the beliefs, some of your beliefs are really limiting and holding you back. But you may have other beliefs that actually, they empower you, they make you creative, they move you forward in a way that feels really wholesome and fulfilling. But that question can be really helpful sometimes, particularly on retreat, when you have time to kind of step away, because it really is a process of deconstruction. What do you know for certain? Maybe it's not so helpful when you're going into a meeting or you're needing to accomplish something. On a retreat at the Forest Refuge, everyone has a little job. It's called your yogi job. And my job was at 5:45, I would set up the breakfast line. And then at 7:15, I would come back and clean everything up and put everything away. Other than that, where I had to show up for that one thing, it allowed me to stay in that sort of deconstructive process of what do I know? What do I know for certain? It was helpful. And there's something that occurs, particularly through that inquiry, but anytime you practice meditation, is that when you're cultivating mindfulness, when you're cultivating non-judging awareness, you automatically begin to notice where you're judging, where you're holding on. As I often say, if you meditate, you'll feel better. You'll feel your anger, your sadness, your depression, all of it, you'll feel it much better. And what I found interesting is to really see in my experience how much I'm a product of conditioning. You ever notice how when you're meditating sometimes, how thoughts just pop up? The craziest thoughts pop up randomly. Many of them, I think, are just the swamp gas of the brain kind of burning off. But sometimes there are really interesting nuggets that arise. And I really do believe that there's an intelligence that sort of brings things up when you're really sitting with an intention to see clearly. And I found myself at one point in one of my meditations going through a list of people in my life who I've known who are no longer here, people who've died. And I've noticed how the list is getting longer and longer as I age. But a really good friend of mine died just about 3 weeks ago. One of my best buddies in the world. And we've known each other since we were maybe 24, 25, way back in the ashram. Her Sanskrit name was Dharni. So her name was Dharni Burnham, so I would call her Barney Durnham. And she died of breast cancer after kind of a long, protracted process. And I had the gift of being with her a few times and just really feeling that connection that we shared for so many decades. But as I was sitting and reflecting on her and the richness of her life and our shared life and the fact that she's not here, in fact, I remember it popped up because I had kind of a funny thought. I thought, oh, I've got to tell Darnie this. And I realized she's not here to tell anymore. But I remembered she lived in Western Massachusetts, and so I go up to Kripalu Center about 5 times a year to teach. And over the last couple of years, she would say, come early so we can have a couple of days to hang out. And I never did because I was too busy. And a couple of times she got angry with me. Just come early, let's spend some time. And I didn't. And suddenly I found myself having to sit with that regret. And that sort of spread out to other people who I know and love in my life that I didn't really take the time to be with. One of my father's favorite things was fishing. He had a camp in northern Maine, and I realized I never really went up to fish with him. I don't really like fishing, but I certainly love my father, but I didn't take the time. And so with that was just sitting with that undigested sadness and regret. So the only option I really had to do was to bring the practice of rain to that, to recognize the sadness, the regret, to allow it to be there, and then to really investigate it and to be intimate with it, to really feel the kind of the ache and the heaviness and all the mental formations that go with that. And then the end of that equation, just to nourish it with some compassion and empathy. I was not expecting that to arise. But in that, I saw all my conditioning about being a busy and ambitious person on my way somewhere. And I think so much of our shared sadness, our shared regret, is all the times in your life that you weren't there for them, that you were on your way somewhere else. There's a story I've shared before of a wise teacher. And to see him, you had to walk 3 days in the mountains to get to him. And then he would ask you a question, and then you would walk 3 days back. And he would say, I'll be with you, but you can't tell anyone this question. And everyone would talk about how transformative the experience was. And I can tell you the question. And the question he would ask them after their trek to be with him was, what are you not willing to feel? And they would have 3 days to contemplate that as they would walk back. So it's a powerful question. And again, we'll take a little 60-second inquiry into that. If you close your eyes, and when you connect with your breath, you might smooth out the breath, deepen the breath, and take some time with this question. What are you not willing to feel? And deepening your breath. And just sensing whatever you may have touched into, just to kind of let it know you see it. perhaps to let it know your willingness when the conditions are right to be with us. And again, you can deepen your breath if you like and let your eyes open. I speak often of this metaphor from Joseph Campbell of the circle, big circle, a line through the middle, horizontal line. Above the line, what you're aware of. Below the line, what you're not aware of. And this practice, whether it's a moment of pausing or taking time to sit in meditation or doing a time of intensive practice, you can move the line. To the degree that you can relax and pay attention, you will begin to feel and notice what you hadn't felt before. And that's not only a process of coming more alive, it's a process of freedom. It's been said that enlightenment is not about gaining something. It's about removing what isn't you. And there was a recognition for me in my conditioning of how much my busyness, my chronic busyness was, on the one hand, there are two sides of every coin. The one side was there's a lot of creativity, a lot of enjoyment and success. But the other side of that coin is unwilling to really feel what's there. So meditation, or the intention to practice non-judging awareness, is not for the faint of heart. Whatever's between you and feeling free will make its way to you. And this kind of leads to the third chapter. And that is that enlightenment is not a magic wand. Something the Buddha said, or reportedly said, that I found very helpful. Or he said that no one is going to save you. You have to take responsibility for your life, for your own awakening. And there's something kind of harsh about that, but also something freeing about that. That we have to take responsibility for our own awakening. And that's the capacity to really stop and turn toward whatever it is that's between you and feeling free. So not only did I have my own episode of kind of all the regrets and sadness I felt about people I've lost in life, but also people who are in my life that I'm just too busy to be there for. Along with seeing my own being in so much kind of physical unpleasantness. And at one point I was kind of feeling kind of the collective dreck of my experience. I was not having fun. I'm kind of attached to fun. I'm attached to feeling good. And so with it was a sense of like, oh my God, 2 days down, 5 days to go. How can I stop this? And there's a phrase I use a lot. If you've been to this class, you've heard me say a lot, of the two mindfulness questions. What's happening, seeing clearly, and the compassion inquiry, can you be with it? And so as I was kind of with this sort of like unnamed, vague sense of dread and dreck, I just said to myself, I can be with this. And then spontaneously, the words changed, and I said, I will be with this. And it was a very powerful shift. It was very, very empowering. Like, whatever this is, I will be with it. As opposed to just sort of like, I will tolerate it, to I will be with this. I will see what this is, and I will investigate this, was a way of sort of making who I am larger than this in a very powerful way. I felt it quite empowering. So maybe another quick little reflection, if you like. And again, as you soften your breath and close the eyes, is there something in your life that's between you and feeling really good, feeling happy or free? You might just sense some issue. It doesn't have to be a big one. And you might take a moment to explore the difference between saying, I can be with this, to I will be with this. And again, deepening the breath and letting your eyes open, if you like. Do you have a sense of the difference between the two? And really what it comes down to, there's this great phrase that says, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? You know? If you argue with reality, you're going to lose. So what about wholehearted, enthusiastic cooperation with reality? And again, if your intention is to be awake to the truth of your life, the price you have to pay is the willingness to be brutally honest with yourself. And that was a very powerful recognition that I came to in my retreat. A recognition that being scrupulously honest is the price we pay for being more awake and more alive. And so when something arises that's between you and feeling free, feeling happiness, it's feeling happy, it's the courage to pause and name it and then actively investigate it, to look closely at it. And as I like to say, perhaps ad nauseum, you don't have to fix it. Just get familiar with it. And it's the familiarity that will lead to wisdom. But again, it's the capacity to pause, turn toward whatever it is that's between you and feeling free. Allow it, make room for it, investigate it, notice the effect of bringing compassion and empathy to it, and see how it changes, see how it shifts. So finally, in our last little bit here, I think all spiritual practice ultimately leads to a real inquiry into what am I? Who are you? What are you? What is this life? Knowing that your body's going to fall away, what are you? And so it leads to an investigation into the self. And there's some very powerful teachings around the nature of self through this lens of Buddhist psychology. There's an awareness that there's a relative self and an absolute self. So oftentimes inquiry or the questions you ask yourself are kind of really focused on, what is not self? But as I did a lot of inquiry, because again I had no concentration, I explored the question, what is self? What is this separate sense of self? And again, I would just simply come back to that question. Well, what is this self? And I saw much deeper into my conditioning. The impact of my family system, my parents, my culture, how all of that has shaped who I am, for better or for worse. But it also brought me into a very deep investigation of a way of sort of deconstructing the self that I would just touch on just briefly. The Buddha spoke of what are called the aggregates. When you break down this question of who you are as a being, there are a couple elements. The first is form or matter. So there's the physical form of who you are, your body, everything that goes into the makeup of your physical body. What arises out of form then is sensation or feeling. So they're just sort of the raw sensations that arise out of this form of this flesh unit you're walking around in. And what arises out of that direct sensation is what we call perception. Like there's a mental process that recognizes what's happening in sensation and in form. Out of that arises what we call the mental formations. And that's sort of like the mental activity of a call to action. It's too hot, I need to take my coat off. Or I'm restless, I need to go for a walk. I'm thirsty and I need to drink. And what arises out of the mental formations is what we call consciousness. And that's the recognition of all those interrelated factors of form, feeling, perception, and mental formations. And it becomes a very interesting way of exploring this phenomena of who you are as this separate self. So I thought I might lead a short little reflection on this and just say a few more words before we close. So again, if you like, you can close your eyes. And again, as you feel the breath, as you slow down your breath a little bit, take some time to investigate this layer of who you are in the manifestation of form. Can you feel the outline of your body? Can you feel everything that's moving on the inside, all the systems of your body functioning to keep you alive? There's an element to your being that is purely mechanical, this animal of a body. And can you sense arising out of form this realm of sensation or feeling known as Vedana? Sensation or feeling comes into three categories of unpleasant, pleasant, and that which is between. And just take a few moments to sense if you can isolate the raw experience of sensation without adding anything to it. Recognizing the form of your body. Recognizing the sensations that arise out of form And can you now focus exclusively on this quality of perception, or the mental process that registers what's happening in form and sensation? And can you notice the arising of mental formations? Kind of the call to action as you respond to this phenomena arising through body, feeling, and perception. And we'll take the next few minutes now to explore the pure consciousness or awareness. Can you watch or observe the interconnected play of form, sensation, perception, and mental formations? Sensing as the observer. A great teacher once said, "To study the truth is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." Can you sense a quality of awareness that can observe without grasping, observe without judgment, this interconnected play of the body, of feeling, perception, and mental formations, to allow it to simply be as it is. And gently now lengthening the breath. And if you like, you can now let your eyes open once again. We all have a natural built-in desire to be truly happy, regardless of conditions. I think particularly in this wild and wacky time we're living in, that call could really be intensified. It's just so easy to be caught into the polarity, into the drama of this life that we're living. And so whether your practice is simply pausing and taking a breath every now and then, or having a regular meditation practice, or you're called to the deeper practices, it's enormously helpful just to pause, to really explore what is this life that you're living. What do you know for certain? And to sense how much of your life is living out of conditioning. Just the conditioning of moving away from pain, moving toward pleasure. There's something powerful that I find in recognizing that enlightenment is not a magic wand. It's not like one day someone's going to go bop and we'll see clearly forever and permanently. But it actually requires a real rigor and scrupulous honesty to identify what is it that's between you and feeling free, and to turn to it, to be with it, to investigate it fully. And the result is cultivating a quality of steadiness, being able to increase your capacity for happiness, to increase your capacity for empathy and compassion and joy. And I have to say, it is such an honor and a privilege to share these practices with you. Thank you for your kind attention. I did want to mention, just before we close, again, a reminder that a very, very helpful way to deepen your meditation practice is to kind of work with the body to prepare yourself for meditation. And yoga is a really wonderful way to do that. And there is a yoga class that's offered at 6:30. So know that that's another tool if you can give yourself a little more time. Also, if you are called to deepen your practice and you don't have the time to go off and do a month-long retreat or a 2-month retreat, but have an active life and would like to explore cultivating community, there are just a few more weeks before the applications are due for the year of living mindfully. And this will be the 9th year I'll be offering it. It is comprised of 2 weekend retreats, of 5 day-long retreats, a monthly class, and you work with a small group throughout the course of the year, and some private sessions with me, and highly encouraged to do an intensive retreat during the year. So the whole idea is to really cultivate and help keep your practice alive. It's one thing to do it yourself. It's a completely different thing to do it when you're associated with like-minded people. So there's a little flyer in the back, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to speak with you. In fact, we have a lot of survivors from the Year of Living Mindfully here. If any would be willing to just to be available for those who have any questions, maybe we could just kind of meet right up here afterward. So it's a commitment. It might not be the right time in your life for it, but if it is a match, it might be worth looking at. So just want to let you know of that. As always, thank you for your support for the class. If you want to be on the mailing list, you can sign up in the back. And have a wonderful evening. I believe I saw some cookies headed out toward the lobby afterwards, so that's always a good way to transition. Thank you again. Have a good night.